Security. Remove the trespasser. She isn't family. My father announced this to a room of 300 elites, grinning as he prepared to sign the $450 million merger that would erase our legacy. The crowd roared with laughter. They thought I was just the desperate black sheep crashing the party. They didn't know the envelope in my hand wasn't a gift. It was an execution order for his empire. I didn't run. I walked onto the stage, snatched the microphone, and whispered 4 words that made him drop his pen in terror. The sale is illegal. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope and why he screamed for the doors to be locked, tell me in the comments. Have you ever been the underdog who held the winning card? I want to hear your story. My father stared at me like I was a ghost. To him, I was just Savannah, the 29-year-old disappointment he'd disowned 5 years ago for asking too many questions about the company ledgers. He forgot that asking questions is exactly what I do for a living now. He saw a daughter he could bully. He didn't see the forensic accountant who spends her days hunting down assets for the federal government. I ripped the seal on the envelope. The sound was louder than a gunshot in the silent room. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply held up the yellowed parchment so the light from the chandeliers caught the embossed seal of my grandfather. This is the original deed to Coal Industries, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room without a tremor. Specifically, Clause 4, Section A. A defeasible fee. I looked directly at the shady investors sitting in the front row, the ones who thought they were buying a clean company. It states that Gregory Cole retains ownership only on the condition that the company remains independent. The moment he attempts to sell, merge, or liquidate, the title automatically transfers to the alternate heir. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. For a second, the only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning. The investors exchanged nervous glances. The legal counsel for the buyers started whispering frantically into his phone. My father's face went from pale to a dangerous shade of red. Then, he laughed. It was a wet, nervous sound that didn't reach his eyes. "This is pathetic," he sneered, turning his back to me to address the crowd. "My daughter is clearly unwell. She's been estranged for years, and is obviously suffering from some sort of delusion. That document is a forgery. Security. Remove her." He reached for his gold fountain pen, his hand shaking slightly, and moved to sign the merger documents on the podium. He was trying to force the sale through, trying to outrun the truth with ink. If he signed, the money would transfer, and he could disappear before the lawyers unraveled the mess. I didn't tackle him. I didn't shove him. I reached for the magnum of vintage Dom Perignon sitting on the podium, the bottle meant for his celebratory toast. With one smooth, calculated motion, I tipped it over. The sticky, golden liquid cascaded onto the contract. The ink blurred instantly. The paper soddened and began to dissolve into a pulpy mess. My father froze, the pen hovering over a puddle of champagne. "Contract voided due to destruction of materials," I said coldly. I locked eyes with him, seeing the panic finally break through his arrogance. "Now get off my stage." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The investors stepped back, closing their briefcases. The whispers started, and they weren't laughing at me anymore. They were looking at Gregory like he was a radioactive liability. For a heartbeat, I stood there, chest heaving, watching him crumble. I thought it was over. I thought I had won. I expected him to scream. I expected him to lunge at me or call the police. I didn't expect the silence. For a terrifying second, my father didn't move. He just stared at the ruined contract, watching the champagne drip onto his Italian leather shoes. Then he looked up at me, and the panic in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something cold and void. A look I hadn't seen since I was 12 years old, and he caught me reading his private journals. It wasn't anger. It was erasure. He adjusted his cufflinks, took a deep breath, and gave a subtle, two-finger signal to the head of security standing by the service entrance. The hum of the room changed instantly. The soft recessed lighting flickered once, then turned a harsh, emergency red. The heavy steel doors of the main elevators slammed shut with a mechanical thud that vibrated through the floor. A moment later, the magnetic locks on the emergency stairwell exits engaged with a loud, final click. The crowd murmured, confusion rippling through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," my father said, his voice smooth, amplified by the microphone he'd snatched back. "We have a security breach. My daughter is unfortunately suffering from a severe psychotic episode. The documents she is holding are forged, and she is a danger to herself and others." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the monster clearly. You have to understand something about men like Gregory Cole. To a narcissist, public humiliation isn't just embarrassing, it is a psychological death. When I poured that champagne, I didn't just ruin a contract. I shattered the mirror he uses to worship himself. In that moment, he didn't care about the merger, the money, or the prison time. He only cared about re-establishing dominance. He would burn this entire building to the ground with everyone inside, rather than let me walk out of here with the upper hand. That is the rage of an exposed king. It is primal. It is destructive. And it is terrifyingly unpredictable. Restrain her, he ordered, pointing a manicured finger at me. 3 private security guards, men the size of linebackers who were definitely not on the hotel payroll, moved in. They didn't ask me to leave. They didn't offer an escort. They closed the circle. Dad, you can't do this, Kenneth stammered from the side of the stage, looking pale. There are witnesses. There are no witnesses, Kenneth, my father snapped without looking at him. There are only guests who are currently under lockdown for their own protection. He turned back to the investors, flashing that charming, predatory smile. Apologies for the interruption. We are initiating a standard security protocol to ensure Miss Cole receives the medical attention she desperately needs. The elevators will remain overridden until the situation is contained. Containment. That was his word for it. The first guard grabbed my arm. His grip was bruising, professional, devoid of hesitation. I tried to jerk away, but the second one grabbed my other shoulder. I was 60 floors up in the air, sealed in a glass box with 300 people who were too polite or too afraid to intervene. I looked at the investors, the wealthy elite, silently begging someone to speak up, to say this was insane. But they just watched, sipping their drinks, relieved the target wasn't on their backs. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for a company. I was fighting to survive the night. One of the guards twisted my arm behind my back, forcing me toward the service exit. Pain shot up my shoulder, sharp and white-hot. Let her go, Uncle Walter shouted, though he stayed safely behind the buffet table. Don't hurt her, Kenneth added weakly, his voice trembling. Dad, this is too much. My father didn't even look at them. He was watching the investors, gauging their reaction, smoothing over the cracks in his perfect evening. As the guard shoved me forward, the smell of his cheap cologne triggered a memory so vivid it nearly buckled my knees. 10 years ago. I was 19, standing in my father's office, holding a spreadsheet. I had found a discrepancy, a rounding error of $2 million funneled into a shell company in Zurich. I thought I was helping. I thought he would be proud of my attention to detail. Instead, he looked at me with that same cold, erasing stare. He told me I was incompetent. He told me I didn't understand business. He fired me on the spot and cut off my tuition, claiming I was too stupid to waste money on. He thought he was discarding a liability. He didn't know he was creating his own executioner. That day, I didn't just leave the building. I walked straight into a recruitment office for the federal government. He wanted me to be nothing. So I became the thing he fears most. A forensic accountant. I gritted my teeth and stomped down hard on the guard's instep. He grunted, his grip loosening just enough for me to wrench my arm free. I didn't run for the door. I spun around to face the room, my back against the cold glass of the window, the city lights swimming dizzyingly behind me. You think I'm just the jealous sister? I screamed, my voice raw. I pointed a shaking finger at the investors in the front row. Ask him about the Redstone account in the Caymans. The lead investor, a man who had been sipping scotch calmly, froze. Ask him why the company valuation is double the actual assets. I continued, locking eyes with him. This isn't a merger. It's a laundering scheme for cartel cash. And I have spent 5 years tracking every single cent. Kenneth stepped forward, looking terrified. Savannah. Stop. You don't know what you're saying. I know that while you were driving Ferraris bought with stolen pension funds, I was eating ramen in a studio apartment, learning how to trace wire transfers. I snapped at him. You laughed at me for being poor, Kenneth. You didn't realize that hunger makes you sharp. My father stormed across the stage, his face twisted. She is lying. She's delusional. Am I? I challenged, breathing hard. Then why did you move $4 million to the Shell Corp in Panama this morning at 8:03 a.m.? Was that a delusion, Dad? Or was that the final cleaning fee? The room went deadly silent. That wasn't a guess. That was a specific, verifiable fact. The investors looked at Gregory, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in their eyes. They weren't afraid of a crazy girl. They were afraid of a federal witness. My father lunged for me, abandoning all pretense of control. Shut her up. Now. The guards surged forward again. But the damage was done. I had planted the doubt. Now I just needed to survive long enough to watch it grow. The guards hesitated. My accusation about the Cayman accounts had landed, and for a split second, even the hired muscle wondered if they were assaulting a federal witness. I used that moment of doubt to jerk my arm free and back away until my shoulder blades hit the cold, floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse wall. Behind me, The city of Seattle was a grid of uncaring lights. In front of me, my father was vibrating with a rage so intense it was almost palpable. I stopped shouting. I stopped struggling. I realized in that second that I couldn't win a physical fight against 3 men, but I could win a psychological war against one narcissist. I straightened my dress, smoothed my hair, and looked at him with pity. "You're terrified," I said softly. The silence in the room was so deep that my whisper carried. "You know the walls are closing in. You know the audit is coming, and you think this merger is your escape hatch. There is no audit," my father spat, though his eyes darted nervously to the investors. "Get her out of here." "Wait," I said, holding up a hand. "If I'm crazy, if these documents are forged, and if you really own this company, then sign it." I pointed to Uncle Walter, who was clutching his briefcase against his chest like a shield. "Walter always carries a backup copy. Don't you, Walter?" Walter looked like he was about to be sick. He pulled a fresh, crisp stack of papers from his bag with trembling hands. He placed them on the podium, avoiding my eyes. "Go ahead, Dad," I challenged, my voice dripping with the same cold condescension he'd used on me my entire life. "Prove me wrong. Prove you're the king. Sign the sale. Transfer the title. Show everyone here that you have the power to do whatever you want." It was the ultimate bait. I was gambling everything on his ego. A rational man would stop. A rational man would clear the room, call his lawyers, and de-escalate. But Gregory Cole wasn't rational. He was a man who had just been humiliated by the daughter he considered worthless. To back down now would be an admission of defeat. To sign was to reassert his dominance. He looked at the investors, who were watching him with shark-like intensity. He looked at Kenneth, who was uselessly wringing his hands. Then he looked at me. He snatched the gold pen from his pocket. "I built this," he hissed, marching back to the podium. "I own this, and no ungrateful, delusional child is going to tell me what I can do with my property." He uncapped the pen. The scratch of the nib against the paper sounded deafening in the quiet room. He signed his name with a flourish, pressing down so hard the paper nearly tore. "Done," he announced, holding up the document triumphantly. "The company is sold. The money is wired. And you are nothing." I didn't flinch. I glanced at the clock on the wall. 9:02 p. Perfect. He thought he was signing a merger. He didn't know he was signing a confession. He thought the ink proved his ownership. He didn't realize it was the final element required to close the trap I'd been building for 2 years. I smiled at him. "Thank you, Dad." The ink was barely dry when the lead investor snapped the folder shut. He didn't look at the champagne stains or the tremor in my father's signature. He just looked at the wire transfer confirmation on his tablet. "Funds initiated," he said, his voice flat. "The asset is secured." My father let out a breath that sounded like a tire deflating. He slumped against the podium, the adrenaline of his rage fading into the smug exhaustion of a man who believes he has survived the storm. He looked at me, and his smile returned cruel, triumphant, and pitying. "You tried, Savannah," he said, smoothing his jacket. "I'll give you that. You actually made me sweat for a minute. But in the end, you're just a little girl with a big imagination and no leverage." He turned to the security team. "Take her to the freight elevator, and make sure she understands she is never to set foot in this building again." I didn't move. I kept my eyes on Kenneth. My brother had been lurking in the shadows all night, useless and afraid, watching our father reclaim the room. He knew weakness disgusted him. He needed a win. So Kenneth stepped forward and grabbed the deed from the podium, the yellowed parchment, the only proof of the defeasible fee holding it like trash. "This?" he sneered. "Your big weapon? A piece of paper from a senile old man?" I told him to put it down, letting just enough fear slip into my voice to embolden him. He smiled, pulled out a silver Zippo Dad's gift and lit it. Gasps rippled through the room as he touched the flame to the corner. The paper ignited instantly, curling into ash. My father laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "That's how you solve a problem," he said. Kenneth crushed the ashes under his shoe, beaming. "No proof now," he mocked. "Just a crazy girl in a pile of ash." The guards dragged me toward the exit. They thought I was finished. I stopped struggling. Then I laughed. The room froze. "I didn't need the deed," I said calmly. "I needed your signature." I looked at my father. "That merger you signed? It authorized a federal wire transfer. You just committed wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering on record, in front of 300 witnesses." He went pale. I nodded once toward the bartender. He dropped the shaker and pulled out a badge. "Federal agents, nobody move." The room erupted. The waiters sealed the exits. The investors stood, revealing FBI jackets. It had been a 6-month sting. My father was arrested on the spot. Kenneth panicked as an agent approached him, then shouted that he had a deal. He produced the black ledger, the record of every crime my father had committed, and handed it over for immunity. My father collapsed, staring at his favorite son in pure betrayal. They were led away. The empire became a crime scene. Later, an agent told me the clean assets would revert to me hundreds of millions. I declined. Liquidate everything, I said. Pay the stolen pensions. Use the rest to compensate fraud victims. I left the penthouse, walked into the night, and drove away in my old car. I didn't have an empire anymore, but for the first time in my life, I was free.